Hi, good morning. My name is Tom Conkle from Optic Cyber Solutions. I want to take a few moments today to talk about CMMC scoping. This is a topic that's being discussed quite a bit within the CMMC community, and probably rightfully so, because it's an extremely important part of your CMMC journey, making sure that you've figured out what is the appropriate CMMC boundaries for your environment so that it's scoped appropriately, and we make sure that we're putting the controls in the place where they need to be. So for CMMC scoping, the good news and the bad news is that it's completely up to you. The DoD does not prescribe how you have to scope the environment. They just tell you that they want you to make sure that you have a good understanding of what the scope of your environment is before you go through either a self-assessment or the certification assessment. So that's good news, but it does leave us with some challenges on what we need to actually scope in. But we can decide to consider the entire organization in the scope for our CMMC boundary. We may just decide that a single business unit is really the only piece of the organization that is processing FCI or CUI. So we'll just scope it for that business unit, or maybe just a department within the organization. But it's really key to just think about when you deliver on DoD contracts, what portions of your organization might have FCI and CUI, so that we make sure that we scope it to the appropriate organizational level, if you will. And the general rule is, though, especially for smaller organizations with 100 or less employees, if you have 40 to 45% of the individuals in your organization using FCI or CUI, it might be better to go ahead and just scope in the entire organization rather than running two separate security programs, one for your corporate cybersecurity and one for your CUI cybersecurity requirements as necessary for CMMC. So there is some other considerations while you're defining your scope to take into account of, do you really want to run two programs? Does it make sense for you? Okay, so now that we know CMMC doesn't prescribe for us how we scope the environment, it's up to us to pick whether we want to do for the entire organization, the business unit, or a department in the organization. We need to get a sense as to what are the things that need to be called out in our scope, the scope for our environment itself. So we need to consider things such as the people, right? Who are the people that are actually going to process the CUI information or the FCI information? What are the leadership team that's responsible for overseeing that? Will they have access to CUI as they review their work and maintain it? So we need to keep that in mind as well. As partners, these partners could be subcontractors or your managed service providers that are helping you manage the environment that you scoped. So in addition to the people, we also want to look at the technology of what specific systems and devices are used by those people that we're scoping in that are required to do the work for the CUI environment itself. In addition to technology, we consider the facilities, right? Do we have a physical office location? Are there satellite offices? And don't forget the data center, where the actual CUI and FCI is going to reside. We just need to make sure that we've identified those and where they're at, and start thinking about the processes that help align all of these things, right? So that we make sure that people are using the technology appropriately and the facilities where they're authorized to work from. As you begin to define your CMMC boundary, you need to consider all the resources that are used to support the DoD contract with CUI information. So we need to understand that as we go through the CMMC process, whether again self-assessment or certification assessment, the scope that you define for your environment becomes the scope that has to be used for delivery of the contract. So you want to make sure that you don't scope your environment to a server in the corner and get that assessed and make sure that it's really secure. And then on delivery, pick a different set of systems or a different environment that'll deliver on the contract, because when the contracting officer aligns the certification from the CMMC identifier to the identifier that you put in your contract that says which systems you're going to be using in support of that contract, if they don't align on that, probably won't get awarded the contract, because they're requiring CMMC in the contract to begin with, and they want to make sure that the systems being used are the ones that were certified. So after we've identified what type of scope we want to set for our environment, whether it was the enterprise or an enclave, we've identified the people, technology, and facilities that are in part of it, and the processes that support those, we can start laying out a very high level diagram to define what does the environment look like, right? So we start high level and say, okay, here is the environment, here's where we process the CUI, and as we always say, right, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if we can start drawing it out, we can start talking about where the CUI is going to live and whether we want to build it for the entire corporation or an enclave, as we can see here. We're going to start scoping it in for the enclave itself. So after we've had a very high level thought diagram of understanding what are the key things that are, or the key technologies, key processes, facilities that are going to be involved in our scope, we need to make sure that we're starting to populate it appropriately. So here are 4 things to consider as you start building out your scope. And the first is to understand what are the business functions supporting the contracts itself, right? Start understanding, in order to deliver on the DoD contracts that have CUI or FCI in them, what are the key the functions that need to be performed, and then from that we can start saying, okay, based on those key business functions, here are the users that need to have access to that environment. Here's the roles they're going to play on the contract, right? So that we can start identifying the people that will actually do those business functions that we've identified. Once we've identified the people and the access roles that they need to have in order to perform those functions, we can start looking at the systems and the providers and processes that are used to perform those functions. So start thinking, as you think about the people or the departments that are delivering on the CUI contract, we can start thinking, what systems do they need? Where is that CUI actually processed? How are they working? How do they communicate with each other? Who do they need to communicate with regarding CUI? So we start looking at those systems and processes. And then after we start thinking about the system processes, we need to figure out, how is the data moving in the environment? How are we getting it from one place to another so that we can support those business functions? Because remember, CMMC is not just about making sure that we can secure a system. It's making sure that we can secure the system that's processing CUI for the delivery of the contract itself. Once we've thought about the business processes, the people that support those business processes, the technologies, systems, and processes that are supporting the business functions, and how the data is flowing in the environment, we can continue populating our diagram here and start listing out those different capabilities that they need to have, right? Where are the workstations that need access to CUI? Where do they reside? What do the people have on it? And we can start, as you can see in the diagram here, just categorizing the types of systems that we have in each of the environments. We can start looking at the types of information that is flowing within the environment, whether there's an FCI and CUI going between the two environments so that they can communicate and fulfill those business functions, or if we just have that security protection data, or SPD, that's required to oversee it. As previously stated, right, scoping is imperative to make sure that we get it defined properly, and so that we can start working and building out our CMMC program to meet that scope, right? If we start with those business functions that are required to support the contracts processing, storing, or transmitting CUI, we can make sure that all the right assets, the people, are scoped in so that we can define our CMMC program one time, make sure that we're capturing the data flows, making sure that we define the security controls in that scope, and we don't have to go back multiple times as we remember new organizations or new people that need to be put in place to provide our protection, right? So getting the scope down one time lets us go through, implement all the security controls, making sure that we have it. And another benefit of having a well-defined boundary as you get started is it's a requirement anyway in CMMC. It'll go right in the SSP intro so that we understand what is the boundary that the requirements in the implementation for the requirements in the SSP, how they're defined, what it's actually scoping, right? So, and as previously stated, it's up to you to scope your environment appropriately for you. So you can make it as large or small as you want to, but making sure that it's going to support those business capabilities as required to deliver on those DoD contracts is the most important piece. Again, my name is Tom Conkle. I know this was a quick rundown through scoping so that we understand how we should consider and start getting started on our scoping. I've included a couple resources here, including the CMMC Scoping guides that provide more information on the types of assets and things that have to be considered as you build out your scope. I've also included a couple of Optic free resources that'll help you track yourself as you're going through your CMMC journey and implementing the controls. And of course, at Optic, we've helped plenty of organizations scope their environment. We perform scoping workshops just to help you talk through each of the capabilities, making sure that the functions are properly identified and you have a good foundation for the scope of your environment as you begin your journey. So if you're interested in assistance in getting started, feel free to reach out. I'd love to help you.
Optic Cyber Solutions strives to help organizations identify and address their blind spots through our assessment, implementation, and advising services. For more information about Optic Cyber Solutions and our services, reach out at info@opticcyber.com or check out our website at opticcyber.com.